down. We'll be looking at in Numbers chapter 13. Again, I have the majority of the scripture we're going to be reading on the screen as well. So for you at home, it should show up as well for you. We have been going through the book of Numbers. I've called it Road Trip, where God has brought them, or bringing them from Mount Sinai, where they've been for almost a year, and then going to the Promised Land. And so we've watched them and how God set it up for them to follow Him as He led with the cloud, and all sorts of things. But then once they finally moved out, the very first place they camped out, all they did was complain. We've talked about that. Won't go into it. It will come up again. We looked last week at an envy issue. When Moses' own brother and sister looked at him and were just, God's not, he hasn't just talked to you, He's talked to us too, and so this whole thing, and we watch God lovingly yet firmly discipline in a situation like that. Then they move on to the next place, and again, there's little stops along the way, but not all of it's recorded. And so we come to Numbers chapter 13 after they've gone into this desert of Zin, or Paran. It's not quite the same. It's like there's a bigger desert and then there's a smaller, but it's pretty much the same. And so God gives a general command here, where He's like, all right, here is, He doesn't go into detail. He just says, this is what I want you to do. Explore the land. And so we read that. The Lord said to Moses, send some of the men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. And so just this general thing, go to the land that I've promised you. Send out 12 that from each group. And so the next part, is Moses following suit. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran, and all of them were leaders of the Israelites, and these are their names. Now, we're not going to read all this, and again, one, for the sake of time, and two, for the sake of my inability of saying names right. And so I'm just going to highlight. They go through all 12 tribes, sends a leader, and I'm only going to mention two because they're the only two who survive. But sorry to give it away, a little spoiler alert. But from the tribe of Judah, this fourth one listed down, from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Now we're going to hear more about him in this message. You'll hear a lot more about him later. And then you go on down, and from the tribe of Ephraim in verse 8, Hoshea, son of Nun. And then it goes and lists the rest of the tribes. But I mentioned these two because, again, they're the only ones who survive. But they're the ones that God uses greatly in the future, and you'll recognize their names. But just to clarify, you say Hoshea. I'm not sure any one of those prophets or who is he? It says these are the names of the men Moses sent to explore the land. Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua, or Yeshua, or the different ways of pronouncing. And so you're like, okay, Joshua. Yeah, there's even a book of the Bible with his name on it. I've heard of that name too. So there's Caleb and there's Joshua and stuff like that. But just to let you know, Joshua later on becomes the next guy. And this again spoiling, but he becomes the next leader after Moses is dead and stuff. He is kind of more like the general. He's the one who leads, and we're going to read later on. He's, when the army has to go, he's the leader. You want a guy that has power, that has authority to do that. And so Hoshea means he saves. Now, don't you want a general? They're like, hey, man, he saves. Man, he rescues. He delivers. This guy is a great general. Well, let me tell you another great general, better than he saves. And this is the name change. The Lord saves. Oh, that's the general I want. I want someone who depends on the Lord. And all that. So it's these 12 that are sent into to them. But before he goes off, Moses gives, God just gives this general command, explore the land. Moses gets more specific in the command. When Moses sent them to explore the land, explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. And you're going, yeah, I know those places. They're on the map. I drive by it every day. No, Negev is just another thing for the south. It's just the south, and that was kind of a more deserty wilderness area. And then onto the hill country, that's where you think about Judah and where Jerusalem is and stuff like that. And so he says, go on. And he says, here's what I want you to do when you're going through the land. What's the land like? See what the land is like. But also, what are the people like? And whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. He goes on and goes back to the question of what's the land like? With what kind of land do they live in? Is it good or is it bad? And he continues to ask the next verse down, skipping the second part of verse 19. How's the soil? Is it fertile? I want you to do a soil sample. No. How's the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. And it was a season for the first ripe grapes. And then going back to that other question, or what are the people like? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or are they fortified? And so God gives this general command, go out there and do that. And then Moses gives a little bit more detail as to what they're looking for and looking at and stuff like that. And when I prepare a message, I ask questions. When I see God give a command, explore, and then I see Moses add to it, I'm like, okay, was Moses adding to it, or was this just, God knew this is, and I'll just tell you right now, I don't know. Was he asking them to look for things that God had already promised? And he might have been. God might have been saying, hey, this is the land I'm giving you. This is the land. I want them to come back and say, wow, what God said about that, it is exactly, and that might build up their faith. And again, I don't know. These are just some questions that I ask and stuff. And then, what I do is I try to let the Bible speak of itself. And there is a commentary of this event in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is Moses preaching to the people about what they went through in the wilderness. And it says in Deuteronomy, then I said to you, you've reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has given you the land. Go up and take possession of it, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, told you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And so Moses telling the story again, and again, there's an emphasis. When you read through Numbers, it says, it's almost every chapter starts with, and then the Lord said, and then the Lord said, and then the Lord said. And then Deuteronomy, the focus of these messages is, man, you guys, and it's not you guys, it's your parents, because they're all dead by then. They really messed up. And so that's kind of why there's an emphasis. And so he's like, when we got to the edge of the promised land, I was like, Go up. Let's do it. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to spy out the land for us and bring back a report about the route we are to take and the towns we will come to. Okay, little quick question. In in Numbers, who says send the spies out? Somebody. God. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, who says send the spies out? Somebody? The people. And the ideal seemed good to me. So I selected 12 of you, one man from each tribe. And so, boy, this makes my head hurt. So who sent the spies into the land? Was it the Lord? Was it the people? Yes. Now, all we can do is, well, how did that work out? Did God put it on the people's heart? And God used them to go to Moses about, hey, let's seek it out? Was it that the people came to Moses and then Moses brought it to God and God says, well, go ahead. Nobody can answer that. But when we see the results of it, see, God allows tests to come into our lives. Later on, we're going to look at it next week. God says, I've tested you these 10 times. And the thing is, they failed all 10. This is a test. Now, what does God want when He puts us through a test? He wants us to get an A. He wants us to come to Him for help and keep our eyes on Him and be victorious. But we have an enemy who wants to take the test and discourage us and to send us off other paths. And so as they go through this, they left. They went up, back still in Deuteronomy, up to the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and explored it. And so we go back to Numbers, and we see that the leaders explore the land for 40 days. For 40 days. The same amount of time that Moses was up on the mountain. We'll get into this a little bit more next week. And I just simply want to read this part. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin. That's part of the desert of Paran, but it's now in the what would be the Canaanite turf. As far as Rahab toward Label Hamath, and again, I can't even find those on the Bible map. So it's like they knew where it was. They went up through the Negev, again, the south part of it, desert-like area, and came to Hebron, which is, you'll hear more about that, where Heman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. We'll talk about them in just a few minutes. And Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And I'm like, thanks for that information. I'm not sure what to do with that, but we know when it was built now if we know when Zoan was built, but that's all right. We keep going. And so they explored the land for 40 days, and they continue up, and for some reason my clicker's not working. There it is. So when they reached the valley of Eshcol, and again, it gets named that because of this event, so we're not sure exactly where that was either. They cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. Now, let me just share my ignorance here. I go to the grocery store. Most of the time, Candy goes to the grocery store, and she gets a cluster of grapes. It's about this big. I don't need a pole to carry that. How big does a cluster of grapes have to be that require it to be strung up? A cluster, right? It says a single cluster. How big is a cluster of grapes that has to be put on a pole to carry it by 2 men? That's a big cluster of grapes. Now, that may be my ignorance that people go, no, tell me later, okay, it's really just part of a cluster when you get it at the store. I don't know enough about grapes and all that, but I'm just saying, wow. And then they add on top of it those pomegranates. You ever pay for those? Okay. And figs and all these things. So they bringing back, as Moses said, to do this. And so that place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. And so they do their job. They come back 40 days, and then they give their report. The good news, when somebody starts with the good news, you know where you're going to go later. But the good news is, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community of Kadesh. That's the specific oasis area that they're camped out at in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. I could just say, wow, look at that cluster of grapes. Wow, look at this. Wow, man, what fruitfulness. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit. You know what they're saying? The good news is, it is as good as God promised. Oh, wow. I could just see the people going, all right, this is all. Oh, how I wished they got quiet and didn't say anything after that. God's true to his promise. The land's wonderful. The land's great. But, some translations, nevertheless, but the people who live there are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. They're giants. You're looking for the word giant in there? We even saw descendants of Anak there. The word Anak means neck. It just meant long neck. Now, don't picture these people, with big floaty heads or whatever. It's just like, wow, look at, it's just kind of weird how Hebrew language goes. But anyway, it was a term they knew. Very big people. Later on, we read about Goliath, and it tells his dimensions. He's about 9 foot tall, and muscle. I mean, not skinny guy, but wow, And the enemy is everywhere. It says this, the Amalekites live in the Negev, that southern portion. We went through there, and we saw Amalekites. And the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Everywhere we went, we saw the enemy. Now how are the people sounding? Wow, look at the grapes and all that. Yeah, but... oh, they're strong. Oh, they got big fortress cities, giants. An enemy everywhere you looked. That manna sounds really good. Then Caleb, one of the spies, and I put and Joshua because he joins in next chapter as well. They see the promise. Verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people. Silenced because they're making noise. They're grumbling on. What are you? Did you hear what? Anak? Ah, you know. We should go up and take possession of it, of the land, for we can certainly do it. Now, this is not a we got it. It's we've got a God. Some other arguments we're going to look at next week, you know, but we've got a God. I mean, so what if they're powerful? How powerful was Egypt? So what if they've got big fortresses? I mean, so we've got a bigger God. Giants, they're nothing compared to God. That's the attitude that they had. We can certainly do it. Why? Because God said we could. They focus on the promise. The others only see the problem. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. Now listen, when you focus on the problems only seem bigger. They start going into some major exaggeration here. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are great sight. I mean, they start going, it's not just everybody's from Anak. And, you know, it's like, they're big. And the land, I mean, it just swallows up. This is why the fruit is so big, because of the fertilizing. Again. Anyway, so I mean, it's just like, this is so, you know, not everybody was big. The land didn't swallow up people. Or devour people. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from Nephilim, and this is again a reference way back to Genesis, and talking about these mighty, mighty warriors and giants, and we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we look the same to them. Okay, I admit, if I was standing next, I'm not even 6 feet, and so go 3 feet up, and a guy with a lot of muscles, okay. I wouldn't be like a grasshopper, more like a mouse, but not a grasshopper. Or, you know, I mean, you know, again, the exaggeration, and the more you look at the problem, the more it's going to seem bigger, because that's all you're looking at. I can't do it. On the bottom of your half sheet, I added a section. Because I'm breaking the story in half, because I knew we couldn't really do it justice. But here's some things I want you to be thinking about. And then if you're a part of this disciple life, you get to, you know, discuss some of these questions among each other. How do I look at opportunities? What do I focus on? The promises or the problems? Again, this is for self-reflection. That's why I left it on your half sheet. See, what opportunity is God putting before me? And I want to end with just two examples. The first one is Jesus. Jesus knew what it would cost him to save us. He saw the problems. Scorn, shame, pain, rejection, the cross. But what did Jesus focus on? I mean, he readily admitted it. He told his disciples, this is what's going to happen to me. It wasn't that he just kind of put it away. No, he knew. But how could you go forward when you know there's a cross in front of you? What did Jesus focus on? The Father's will. All throughout, he's like, I'm here to do my Father's will. I don't say anything. I don't do anything unless I see the Father doing it. And also his glory. In Psalm 22, it begins with the words that Jesus cried out on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And when you look at Psalm 22, it then goes and describes what's happening on the cross. And Jesus was crying out a reality. He was paying for the sin, and the payment of sin is separation from the Father. But it was more than that. It was him going, look up Psalm 22. And yes, Psalm 22 begins with the anguish and the pain and all this other stuff, but then there's a shift in that psalm. But you, O Lord, be not far off. He started with, my God, why have you forsaken me? Oh no, you be not far off. Oh, my strength, come quickly to help me. Deliver my life from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me. And see, earlier on in the psalm, he's talking about that there's lions around me and there's dogs. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will declare your name to my brothers. In the congregation, I will praise you. That I'm going to use this to point to you, Father. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him, revere him. All you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or disdained the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. How did Jesus make it to the cross? How did he go? Because he focused on his Father's will and his Father's praise. This will give you the most praise, and I'm going to keep my face set as flint to this task. But also, he focused on our salvation. Hebrews chapter 12 says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That Jesus, seeing the cross and all that, he focused beyond the cross and the glory that the Father would have, as well as those who would be saved and be with him for eternity. That's how Jesus faced something far worse than what these people were. But I end with one other illustration. Peter in Matthew chapter 14, he's with the rest of the disciples. They're in a boat. There's a storm. Surprise. I mean, it's just how it always ends up. They get in a boat and there's a storm. And then Jesus isn't with them. And so Jesus goes to them, walking on the water. And then they had that little Scooby-Doo thing, ghost, is it a ghost? And then Jesus calls out to them and says, take courage, it's I. Don't be afraid. And Peter, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come. The Lord commanded, come. And so, I got to get this clicker checked out. I don't know why it's not doing well. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water. Wow. And came toward Jesus. But, nevertheless, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Why did he sink? He got his eyes off the Lord and onto the waves and the wind and onto the problems. The Lord who could handle any problem. Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, why did you doubt? See, I see myself in that story. How many times that God is bringing an opportunity, and instead of fixing my eyes on him, I look at all the problems. Well, what about this? What about, listen, if God's called, God will supply. God will provide. Take the example of Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who kept the focus on the Father and on the mission. So I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. Let me ask a couple questions. Would you be like Caleb and Joshua? Or would you be like the other 10? Where does your focus go? Depends on the day, doesn't it? We can't do this. That is why Jesus came. That is why he paid the price. Putting our trust on him for salvation. That's just the beginning. And maybe today that is a beginning for you. But the rest of the journey is a continual, do you trust me? Focus on me. Acknowledge the problems, but focus on me. Follow me. I can handle it because I know you can't. Follow me. Step out of the boat. Keep your eyes. And so, Jesus, I pray for where people are. Some people might be there and they're facing medical things, as we even prayed for some of them, and going, oh no, what's going to happen when, and how's this, and all. And God, help us in those problems, and the grief, and the unknowns, to keep our eyes on you. They had you in the wilderness, this cloud to go before them. But they turned their eyes on only what the spies saw. Help us. Help us to keep our eyes on you, Jesus. I pray in your name. Amen. Amen.